The following program is brought to you in part by the film Backdoor Channels, The Price of Peace.
Welcome to another Leon Charney report, and we have an intellectual night tonight. We have Daniel Mendelsohn has written a bestseller called The Lost, a search for 6 of the 6 million. 6 million refers to the 6 million Jews who were killed in the Holocaust. Allegedly, they may have been a greater number, who knows. And what Daniel has done is he's traced 6 of his relatives throughout the world and has written this book. It's in its 10th printing. So welcome to the show, Daniel.
Thank you.
Usually you review books. You're a critic, right?
Right.
You won an award for being a great critic.
Yes, well, so they tell me. Yeah.
What makes a great critic, by the way?
What makes a great critic? Somebody who does his homework, I guess. Somebody who has this sort of a balanced approach to the book or whatever it is that he's reviewing. Somebody who's not biased before he gets going. I don't know. Somebody who has good taste and good judgment, finally.
It's very interesting because if you get a subjective personality about a subject, then can he really be an objective critic? It's something that always, I'm always interested in that. Critics, I had a huge client of mine. There was a play written called I'm Solomon, and it was a big hit, and was with a comic named Dick Shawn. And the play was on Broadway. A client of mine put it on, and the critic left at halftime. And I sued the critic. I said he had a fiduciary duty to see the whole play before he criticized the play. And it stood up.
Really?
He had some kind of duty. So, I'm going to criticize your book, but in a very positive way.
Good, then I won't sue you.
I might protect myself. Okay, this is a fascinating book. It's for your Uncle Shmuel. Tell me about your background. Why did you all of a sudden get so... What happened in this book, as I understand it, is that many of the stories that you heard about the relatives who perished during the Holocaust were not true. They're not accurate. And I didn't understand why. What was not accurate about those stories?
Well, I mean, the whole book is a process of finding out exactly what happened to these 6 people, my grandfather's brother and his wife and their 4 children. I mean, it wasn't that I set out to disprove anything, because we didn't have anything to disprove. We had the most tenuous.
All right, but since you were a kid, you were interested in this.
Right.
All right. Why? Do you understand why?
Well, I mean, there were a number of reasons. The first reason was that I was very close to my grandfather, and I was interested in his stories. He was a good storyteller.
Was he an Orthodox Jew?
Yes, he was. And the second was this strange thing that used to happen when I was a kid, because I was said to resemble this great uncle of mine very closely. And so I grew up hearing, this thing that I looked like Uncle Shmuel, and that therefore it created a kind of connection between us when I was still too young to understand what that connection would eventually mean in my life. But I felt connected to this person. And then as I grew up, I was very interested in family history, always. I mean, not just the Holocaust, just everything, because I was interested in my grandfather, who was a very colorful...
What'd your grandfather do?
Interesting. He owned a factory on 26th Street that manufactured braids and trimmings.
And where was he born?
He was born in this town called Bolachov in Galicia in 1902, and he came here as a young adult in 1920. And settled here. And
how many siblings in his family?
He was one of 7.
How many survived?
Well, they all survived. He only had one who stayed behind in the old country.
Shmuel.
Right.
And why did Shmuel stay behind?
Because he had a prosperous business. You see, all the other siblings came to New York in the 20s when things were very bad, but Shmuel was the oldest, and he wanted to rebuild this great family business that had been devastated in the First World War, which he did, and he was a very prosperous man, and he had a life in this place, and he didn't want to go to America, and he didn't want to go to Palestine either.
He understood that the Holocaust was coming.
No, I don't. I'm not so sure.
Where was this factory? What town?
In Balachov, in the same town. The family always was in the same place. But I think in 1939, he had an intimation that there was a war coming. I don't think people had an idea that there was a Holocaust, or certainly I don't think Shmuel had an idea that there was a Holocaust coming. I mean, one of the things that you find out when you work very closely on this material, and I'm talking about this particular part of what became Eastern Poland, is that most people had no clue what was coming. They had an idea it was going to be a war, it was bad, they were going to be invaded, but nobody understood the extent of what was going to be done and the savagery of what was going to be done to them. Even when it was happening to them, they didn't understand. They still didn't believe. When it was happening in the next town and they heard the rumors, they're killing grandmothers, they're killing babies, they're putting people in mass graves, people didn't believe it. So I think, in hindsight, you can look back and you say, oh, people are always saying this to me on my book tour. They say, oh, he should have seen the handwriting on the wall. And blah. Well, we can see the handwriting on the wall because we're reading the handwriting 70 years later. But a lot of these people had no idea what was coming, So, part of my project was to reconstruct the lives of these people as they lived them. They didn't know they were going to be martyrs of the Holocaust. They didn't know they were going to be killed. Right, they were just having a life.
As you were constructed, do you believe that he knew of Hitler at that time?
Well, we know he knew of Hitler because he's writing letters to my grandfather in 1939 in which he says, I wish Hitler should be torn to pieces. I mean, they knew,
All right, so, but this town was part of Poland, right?
Right.
And so Poland was the first country that Hitler took over in 1939.
Right.
He went in there and he invaded and he took them over. So was your uncle incarcerated in 1939?
No, because they were in Eastern Poland. And what happened was, as you know, Eastern Poland, because of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, was ceded to the Soviet Union. So from 1939 to 1941, people in this neck of the woods were part of the Soviet Union, which for them was a blessing because the Soviets weren't great, but they weren't the Nazis.
It was much easier.
So they suffered greatly under the Soviets, but it was a reprieve of sorts for them.
All right, so after 1941, there was the big battle between the Soviets and a lot of Jews escaped to the Soviet Union.
Right.
Did your Shmuel escape to? Did he stay under the Soviet Union, or he was killed in the Holocaust?
Oh, he was killed in the Holocaust. In
a camp?
These people, there were no camps.
They were shot?
They were shot. This was still very early on. I mean, from 1941 to 1942, 1.5 million people were killed before there were death camps.
I was in Babi Yar. You've been there?
No, I haven't been that far east.
And what you see there is a cave where they put 20,000, 30,000 Jews in one night, and they just, Tommy gun, just shut them down. I mean, there was no incarceration, nothing, just blood. So in Poland, it was pretty vicious. So they just shot and shot and shot.
Right. I mean, the death camps
he
were
was
an
married
answer
at that
to
time,
problem.
Shmuel?
Yes, he was married. He had 4 children, 4 teenage children.
All killed?
They were all killed.
Same day?
No. Different days, different times during the occupation of this town.
All right, so that unfortunately makes a fascinating story. And that's really what you get into. And what was the story you were told as a kid? How did your uncle die?
Well, all we heard was that they were killed by the Nazis.
Period.
And then there were scraps of things I overheard. I overheard as a kid my grandfather telling my mother that Shmuel and either all of the rest of them or some of the rest of them were hiding in a castle, and someone betrayed them, a neighbor, a maid, somebody betrayed them. But, it was such a fanciful notion, which of course turned out not to be true in a sense. But that was it. There was a story about they were hiding, some of them were hiding, and somebody turned them in. And that was basically the only thing I heard.
Was that true in the end?
It was true of two of them. Shmuel and one of the girls was still left in 1943 after the others had been killed, and they were hiding.
It was very commonplace, by the way, in Poland for a lot of non-Jews to tattle where the Jews were. I mean, that was the common way of Jews being, so to speak, ratted out. But there were also some very righteous Jews, righteous Gentiles who saved a lot of Jews at that period of time. Another thing, I had the ambassador from Poland on here a few years ago, and he said, one thing that I can tell you is that anti-Semitism is indigenous to our culture and to Poland. Mm-hmm. Did you find that true? Did you travel to Poland, by the way?
Yes, I was in Poland.
And what did you find?
Good, pierogies, good food, no anti-Semitism directed at me. But I wasn't mostly in Poland. I was a lot in Ukraine. I spent a lot of time in Ukraine, but I have to say, while I was in Ukraine, and I was dealing very extensive with Ukrainians and old Ukrainians and interviews and discussions, I never experienced any anti-Jewish feeling. And they knew who I was, they knew I was Jewish, they knew what I was looking for, they knew I was looking in some cases for information about some bad Ukrainians who had done bad things, but they were very forthcoming. And I didn't have any sort of negative experience in my own experience, which is...
You refer to ghosts in your book. What is the meaning of that, really? What you're doing in this book is you're trying to relive the lives of the people who were killed. Is that correct?
Well, yes, to some extent. Trying to find out who they were.
Is that why you refer to them as ghosts?
Well, I think, when you grow up in a house in which you hear this terrible story about people being killed, but you don't know anything else about them, that it has there's a sort of haunted quality about those people. And because we didn't know anything about them, and because my grandfather would never talk about it because it was so traumatic to him, they were wispy and pale, so I thought of them as ghosts. And then the book is a process, to some extent, of, just reanimating them, through the memories of people still alive who knew them.
So you decided to write this book, and you decided to search for six, I assume, are the six of your family, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And where did you start your search?
Well, the first trip we made was to go back to the town itself, which is now, as I say, in Ukraine, and to interview local old Ukrainians, and to ask if anyone remembered them. And at that point, I thought that's as much as I could do, because I did not yet know, when I started the book, that there were 12 Jewish survivors from the town still left. And when I found out about them, that's really when the book got started, because then the book is the story of my tracking down these 12 people one by one, continent to continent, country to country, and asking them what they remembered about my relatives, and in that way sort of bringing back these people to life.
All right, I'm going to hold for a break and we'll come back. The book is The Lost. It's a search for the 6 of 6 million. It's a huge bestseller. It's in its 10th printing, and it's written by Daniel Mendelsohn. And we're going to track where he went to find out how these people live, what happened to these people. It's symptomatic of everybody who had a family in the Holocaust, and I'm sure that there are many viewers who are watching the show who have some kind of similar experience, although I don't think anybody's probably tracked them as well as Daniel has. So I'm sure it relates to a lot of people, and a lot of, unfortunately, a lot of people who would really harmed by this Holocaust business. We'll be right back.
In modern Middle East history, only one peace treaty has stood the test of time, the 1978 Camp David Accord. In the new documentary film, Backdoor Channels, The Price of Peace, learn the true story behind the greatest diplomatic achievement of our time and its lessons for the future.
The price of peace is very high. To have this courageous man and my close friend killed.
Winner of the Telly Award for Best Cultural Program. Now available at select stores including Barnes & Noble and online at Amazon.com. Get the book that inspired the award-winning movie. Leon Charney's Backdoor Channels is now available in bookstores and online in paperback and an ebook for both Kindle and Nook. It's a great way to learn how history was made behind the scenes. Get it at Amazon.com or Barnes & Noble. Be a witness to history. Order Backdoor Channels online at Amazon.com or buy it at Barnes & Noble and get the real story behind the making of the 1978 Camp David Accords.
Anywhere else, this would just be a museum. But this is Jerusalem, and these are the Dead Sea Scrolls, the oldest known biblical text and greatest archaeological find of modern times. And now they're in New York. See the Dead Sea Scrolls, Life and Faith in Biblical Times at Discovery Times Square on 44th Street. The wonders of Israel live in all of us. Come find the Israel in you.
We're back with Daniel Mendelsohn, who's written this book called The Lost, The Search for 6 of 6 Million. That was the 6 of his relatives that he had a tremendous curiosity about. His uncle Shmuel, and his grandfather was very close to Daniel, and he really wanted to find out what happened to this family. So before the break, he was on his way to the Ukraine. He found 12 families that were Jewish, and we're back in the Ukraine with you. So what happened after you went to Ukraine? Were you surprised that 12 families survived?
Well, yes. I mean, they weren't family.
By the way, your brother was a photojournalist?
Yeah, my brother Matt came with me on all my trips.
And he took a lot of photos.
He took the pictures that are in the book of the survivors and the places that we went. What happened was I went to Ukraine, and the whole book in a way is the story of me thinking the book was finished, because I went to Ukraine and I found some people who remembered my relatives, and I thought, okay, I'm done, And then what happened was I discovered these 12 Balachavar Jews, the survivors, totally by accident. It wasn't by going to Ukraine. It was by having gone to Ukraine, because after I went, it turns out, by an incredibly elaborate series of connections, I got a call one night from a guy, and he says, I'm calling from Australia. And I said, who are you? And he said, well, I heard you're interested in finding these Jaeger family from Balachav. And I said, yes. And he said, well, you should come to Australia, because that's where you should be going, not to Ukraine. He said, because I'm a Jewish survivor from Balachav, and I was the high school boyfriend of one of Shmuel Jaeger's daughters.
But how do you know you were looking?
Well, that was the bashert that hung over the whole book, because what happened was...
Bashert means predestined, in case you don't know French.
When we went to Ukraine, we made tapes of our trip, video tapes, and we sent copies to my mother's cousins, who were the other nieces and nephews of Shmuel. And my cousin in Israel showed it to somebody who showed it to somebody who showed it. Israel has 12 people, so... Right. And one of those people knew a survivor, who then called this guy in Sydney and said, you should call this fellow and tell him you can give him some information. And that's how I found the Australian Balachavers, who are 5 in number. And when I got to Australia, they told me about other people. They said, oh, well, you have to go to Sweden. And then I went to Sweden. They said, oh, you have to go to Belarus. And then, and then they said, you have to go to Denmark. And I went to Denmark. I went to Israel. So it was like following the bouncing ball. But it was all accidental in some way.
So basically, the foundation of the book is the 12?
Yes.
And you trace them all over the world?
Yes.
And you get their stories to find out more about your family.
Right.
And how they... What did they tell you?
Well, I mean, it was interesting, because some people remembered very vivid things. What was I trying to do? I was trying to find out originally, how did these people die?
Right.
It seemed very important to me that it not be abstract, just to say they disappeared. I wanted something concrete and detailed. But then, while I started pursuing the story, I realized that the real object of interest was not even so much how they died, but who they were and how they lived, and their individuality, which was taken away from them, and I thought should be restored to them. So I would go and sit with a person like we're talking now, and I would say, well, what do you remember about, and they would start thinking, and it would go over, I would interview people over several days, because every day they remembered more and more. And sometimes they remembered a lot, and sometimes they didn't remember a lot. You know, but everything that they did remember was something that we didn't know before. You know, like one lady in Israel, because I was trying to find out something about Esther, Shmuel's wife, and she was the one we knew the least about. Because the people who are survivors now are in their 80s. They were the age mates of the children of Shmuel.
This is why Spielberg is doing what he did was fantastic, because he recorded all those people.
Right. But I wanted to know something about her, and I wasn't getting anything, because she was just their friend's mother. They didn't really know her. But as I was talking to somebody, an old lady, she said, "Oh, my God, I just remembered," she said, "she had very pretty legs." And I thought that was very touching, you know, because I thought, here's this woman, she was 46 years old when she was killed. Nothing survives of this woman on the face of the earth. But at least now, you know, there's this one fact about her, and I thought that was great. So sometimes it was like that, but sometimes there was story, you know, there was a lot of information.
All right, how old were the children before they were killed?
Well, they were, the youngest was 12, and the oldest was probably 21 when she was killed. The oldest escaped from the town and joined a partisan group that was operating in the forest near this town, and they were all liquidated in 43, summer 43.
She was killed as a partisan?
As a partisan.
And the others?
Well, Shmuel, as we found out very late in the game, was in this hiding place with the second daughter, because there was a Polish boy, a Catholic boy, who was madly in love with her, and he was trying to save her and found them a hiding place, which was given to them by a Polish Catholic lady, a school teacher, and some neighbor saw them and turned them in, denounced them. And the third girl, who was 16 at the time, was killed in the first action, the first roundup, which was in the fall of 1941. She just happened, she was in the wrong place at the wrong time. She was taking a walk, and there was a sort of a dragnet, and they killed 1,000 people. So ultimately, we found out in great detail how each of these people perished, which was grim but satisfying in some sense.
Was Shmuel an Orthodox Jew, or you don't know?
I'm told not, actually. Because the one person remembered that he was he was a very fanatical businessman, and that's the only thing he cared. You know, he didn't know from Shabbos, he didn't know anything. All he did was work all the time, and which was strange to me because my grandfather was so Orthodox. But who knows? Brothers can be different. Was your great-grandfather a rabbinical person, or you don't know? He was a businessman too. It's all a line of businessmen.
And Shmuel, how old was he when he died?
He would have been 48 when he died.
And his wife?
She was 46. So.
You know, it's profound. We talk about 6 million and it becomes a number, but then the profundity of each one's story hits you. And obviously what you've done is brought a lot of reality into that story. And so your narrative here is, you create like they're still alive. I mean, you write this book, it's evidently a fascinating book, and I haven't read through all of it, so I can't tell you that I have, but you recreate something here. Tell me what your style was. What did you do exactly?
Well, I mean, in a way, what I did was just to sort of channel the voices of the people I was talking to, because I thought their voices were much more interesting than my voice. And in fact, one of the things that I tried to be very scrupulous about was not myself to recreate. I'm not a novelist, you know, I'm a journalist. And I didn't want to be filling in the blanks with what I imagined could be the truth.
So basically these are the words
I just talked to them
people who remember.
And let them talk and piece together the fragments that they could give me into something that looked like a bit of a picture, you know. And in fact, whenever there are atrocities, I was very careful not to be describing them myself, because I've never had that experience. I can't describe it. It's indescribable. I only quoted witness statements, documents, things like that.
So the reader of the book. Is your grandfather alive?
No.
So he could not have read this book.
No.
What was the most surprising thing you learned through all these interviews?
I don't know if I should tell you this because it's A, it's such a surprise in the book, and B, it's such a terrible thing about my family, but I'll tell you. My uncle Itzik,
my ratings.
Well, you asked at the beginning, about stories and finding out things weren't true. And a big part of the book is how once you go after these family stories, you realize that your family tells a story about itself because it wants to believe a certain picture of itself. So one of the stories I grew up, which was a bedrock story of my family, is that my grandfather and 5 siblings came to New York. Shmuel, of course, stayed behind and was killed. And one brother, because his wife was such a Zionist, went in the 1930s to Palestine because she was a socialist and and he was there for.
And her name was Golda Meir.
No, not quite. Her name was Aunt Miriam. And because of that, there's a whole branch of my family who are Israeli. And during this search for Shmuel, I found out that this whole Zionist story was a complete fabrication, and that Itzik and Miriam had to leave town because it was found out the family business is a butcher and meat shipping business. It was discovered that he was selling non-kosher meat in the town, and he was run out of town, basically. You can't imagine the day I found this out, because an old woman is talking in Yiddish to me and another survivor, and she said, "Oh, I remember that other brother, he had to leave town." And I thought, had to leave town? What does that mean? She said, "Well, do you really want to hear this story?" And I said, "Yeah, I do." And she said, "Well, there was this time, and the money situation was very bad, and of course non-kosher meat is much less expensive. And he was selling non-kosher meat as kosher meat, and it was a big scandal in a little shtetl, as you can imagine. And the Orthodox women had to break their dishes, and the rabbis of the town apparently put posters on the stores boycotting. It was a huge
problem, a huge problem.
Huge.
It's happening now, by the way, in Monsey, New York.
I saw something about that.
Same problem. It's happening, and people don't trust anything up there.
I know.
And so I can understand.
So it was huge. And I called my mother from Tel Aviv, and I said, "You're not going to believe this." And she says,
she didn't want
"You can't put this in the book." I said, "Are you kidding? That's what the book is about, So we found out more than we bargained for.
Well, I've studied a lot of Zionism, and maybe my next guest has also, and you'll find a lot of reasons why people became Zionists. This one I never heard of.
Well,
but there's also a story about my grandmother who was supposed to have gone to Palestine, and she got on the wrong boat. Would you believe this? And she wound up in America. So she couldn't find out. Now, you're intriguing me to write a book about my family to find out if that's a true story. Well, maybe she wanted to go to America. I don't know, but my family will come after me now. You know what it is when you
Right.
break that type of story, like your mother said. You sure you want to talk about this? So
Right.
let a sleeping dog lie.
Right.
Let her think that she was a secretary for Theodore Herzl. You know what I mean?
Right.
Not running a non-kosher meat factory. It's a great story.
It was. I have to tell you the end of that story, though, quickly, which is that the day I learned that story, I was sitting with a survivor from Balachov, whose mother had been killed because in 1943 it was Pesach, and she was so religious that she came out of her hiding place to make her Seder, and they got her. So when this story I just told you about my relatives was being told, he burst out crying, this guy, and he says, "You see," he says, "your uncle was saved for doing a blasphemous thing, and my mother was so religious, she got killed."
Well, there's a very famous book written about the Holocaust where you had rebbes, Hasidic rebbes, telling people not to leave, that this was God's wish not to leave. A fellow named Ephraim Zurov wrote a book about this, and unfortunately those people perished, and some of the rebbes did get out. So the complications and manifestations of human problems in the Holocaust are manifold, and you have to search for God to find out all these answers. That's your next book. That's your next book.
There's no end.
Searching for God.
Right.
Anyway, we're out of time. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
It's a fascinating book. It's called The Lost: A Search for 6 of 6 million, and 10th printing. That's a lot. We'll be right back with Fred Lazin, who's going to talk to you about Soviet Jewry. I'm going to floor him by telling him I used to work for this quasi-Mossad agency called Nativ, and the Chemi Lebanon, which he writes about, was my boss. First time I disclosed that on television. Don't come after me. And I didn't sell unkosher meat.
In modern Middle East history, only one peace treaty has stood the test of time, the 1978 Camp David Accord. In the new documentary film, Backdoor Channels, The Price of Peace, learn the true story behind the greatest diplomatic achievement of our time and its lessons for the future.
The price of peace is very high to have this courageous man and my close friend killed.
Winner of the Telly Award for Best Cultural Program. Now available at select stores including Barnes & Noble and online at Amazon.com. Get the book that inspired the award-winning movie. Leon Charney's Backdoor Channels is now available in bookstores and online in paperback and an ebook for both Kindle and Nook. It's a great way to learn how history was made behind the scenes. Get it at Amazon.com or Barnes & Noble. Be a witness to history. Order Backdoor Channels online at Amazon.com or buy it at Barnes & Noble and get the real story behind the making of the 1978 Camp David Accords.
We're back. We're now talking to Fred Lazin, who is a professor of political science at Ben Gurion University, a man who emigrated to Israel, which is nice to see because Israel needs the immigration. He's a professor at Ben Gurion University, but you were educated here in the United States, right?
Yes,
Fred?
well, I was born in Boston. I went to UMass as an undergraduate, and then I did two graduate degrees at the University of Chicago.
A nice place.
Yeah, it was a great institution, great experience. And then I came to New York. I taught at John Jay College. I met my wife. She was an Israeli who wanted to go back. And
is that why you went to Israel?
That's part
I thought
of
you were a Zionist with an unkosher butcher shop or something.
No, that was part of the story. But I'm also a product of Young Judea, Hadassah's Zionist youth movement. I was at Tel Yehuda and on the year course. And I was looking forward to going back to Israel. But the fact that I married an Israeli had a lot to do with it.
All right, before we get into your book, which is called The Struggle for Soviet Jewry in American Politics, something that I know a lot about because I was highly involved in bringing Soviet Jews out of the Soviet Union to Austria. And that time, there was a big fight, and I'm sure Fred gets into it, between the American Jews and the Israelis. And the Israelis felt that these people really belonged in Israel because they were putting all the efforts in to get them free. And the American Jews thought they should have freedom of choice. Am I correct?
Yes, that's a major part of the book during the 1970s, where the American Jewish community actually stood up to Rabin, the pressures, and they felt people should have freedom of choice. Although later in the late 80s, when everyone was getting out because of Gorbachev, the American Jewish community changed its stance.
I felt very angry, by the way, I must tell you, and I was very involved in this Soviet Jewry business. In fact, my first book, called Spy for Peace, talks a lot about it. I was enlisted basically by Golda Meir to save Soviet Jews, and she had a person that you talked about, Chemi Lebanon. It was really a half Mossad operation, and my contact was Tzvi Ofer. And the biggest problem I had is I never want to know who I saved, whether it was a hooker or a rabbi, because you do it, as we say in Hebrew, lishma, for the good of what we're supposed to do. But I used to get irritated when we used to put so much effort in, and the Israeli, Nativ I think it was called, they really were trying to bring these guys out. We were doing clandestine things. We were doing things that if in Russia, if they knew about the Soviet Union, they'd arrest you. It wasn't easy. So these Soviet Jews would come. Basically, a lot of them went through Austria, right, through Bruno Kreisky. And then they'd make up their mind. They go to Israel for 3 hours, and then they come to the United States. And it was a big issue. And I got to tell you that I must tell you that I was on the side of Israel at that time, although I was an American. And I'm a lawyer, and I understand freedom of goes and not goes, where you want to go. And I guess, do you come out in this book, do you come out one way or another, or you just report?
Well, no, actually, one time when I started the research, I went to HIAS, and in the beginning, some people in HIAS,
Hebrew, you have to explain.
Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society,
right.
Some people there didn't want me to see the archives. They said, you're an Israeli, you'll be biased. But I tried to be objective in the sense of just study the issue. I mean, what happened was during the 1970s, after 73, 74, 75, more and more people came from what they call the heartland. These were totally assimilated Jews. The main motivation was a better life. And many of them thought they could get a better life, not in Israel, but in the United States. Right. But as I said, later on what happens in the late 80s, when almost everyone can get out, the United States decided to close the gates.
But Fred,
and the American Jewish community supported that decision.
But Fred, the operation was really by the Israelis.
Now, well, without a doubt, without the Israeli initiative, there never would have been a Soviet Jewry movement.
She was Fabrent, you know, Golda Meir, this was
Right.
one of the prime objectives of, she had a guy named Metzger who was working with her over there during the Prime Minister's Bureau. I still remember all these names. And they would come after me all the time. And
Well, they made inroads into the American Jewish community. They were behind the scenes. They set up organizations, the National Conference of Soviet Jewry and its
Jerry
predecessor.
Goodman,
Yeah.
I remember him. But the reason I was picked up is because in my day I was counsel to a senator from Indiana, Vance Hartke, and there were two Jewish senators, Ribicoff and Javits. Not like today where you got half the Congress is semi-Jewish or Jewish, you know.
Right.
And so they enlisted me for some reason. And then they appeal to you, you know, as a Jew, you got to do this, you got to help, and so you go out and you do it. But it was a big issue. But before we talk about that,
Okay.
you're a professor of political science.
Yes.
What's going on in that country now, morally?
Well, I think, morally, well, we have the problem with, we have a
But
minister.
it's systemic in the country, is it not? Or yes? I mean, you have Olmert under indictment, Tzachary Amegvi, who's head of the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee, under indictment, Chaim Ramon convicted of kissing a woman, Justice Minister, the Katsav allegedly a rapist who's...
Okay, well, the only thing I would correct you on is the Prime Minister for the time being is not under indictment.
No, he's being questioned.
He's being questioned. But in Israel, we have this tradition, often by politicians, of over the last couple of years, if not before, sort of a disregard for the fine letter of the law.
Every Prime Minister, by the way. Bibi Netanyahu was investigated.
I mean, the one Prime Minister that one time violated the law, or his wife did, you might recall Rabin and his wife Leah in the bank.
You want to tell me about? I was the lawyer.
Oh, okay.
She had $18,000. I'll give you the story.
Okay,
Don Margalit broke the story.
Right.
And she had $18,000 in a bank in Washington, D.C. And Yitzhak Rabin resigned because of that.
Right.
It was on a Saturday night. I was there. I saw the whole event, so I'm talking history to you. And I was with Rabin when he resigned at his house in 7 Harav Ashi Street in
Tel
Aviv. And what happened was Barak, who was the Supreme Court Justice at that time, was the Attorney General. And what we were able to do for Leah Rabin was there's something in Israel where it's not criminal and it's not civil, and you can make some kind of compromise. And Leah Rabin never forgot that. And when Yitzhak Rabin had his funeral and he was assassinated, and Barak tried to shake her hand, she wouldn't shake her hand. You remember that?
Okay. I don't recall that, but...
So maybe you got to interview me.
Okay.
We got a lot of history.
No, but it's, you know, there was... it seems to me that the overriding issue in Israel today is not so much just the issue of corruption. It's a problem. It's really the aftermath of the Lebanese war and the problem of leadership in the country.
Okay.
I think there's a tremendous crisis. I think the only positive news out of Israel the last two and a half weeks is the resignation of the chief of staff. Chalutz taking responsibility for his role. And in my opinion, and it's my opinion, hopefully that will lead to other resignations of the prime minister, the defense minister, and...
I think they're all going to have to go.
Right.
I don't think...
I mean, I think that we have a situation of leadership in Israel where, without a doubt, the Minister of Defense is out of his league, but I also think the Prime Minister is out of his league. And I think if you look back at Sharon and some of the decisions and his thinking of the future, I don't think his idea was to have Ehud Olmert replace him in the future.
Ehud Olmert was 37th on the Likud list.
37th on the Likud. He didn't get a major ministry. I think there were other people in
No, it was a
Sharon had in
political
mind.
deal
Yeah.
that the
It was a compromise to keep him in the government and
right.
prevent this
But
bolting.
Omar didn't want to give up the Treasury, so Hirshhorn took over the Treasury. But you also have people in the tax authority who are under questioning now.
Oh, well, that's another scandal. But one of the key people in the tax authority, the sister, is in the Prime Minister's office, which is also embarrassing for the Prime Minister. But I mean, Ehud Olmert has a long record, and I don't come to the United States to speak against the Prime Minister. But as a political scientist, way back in the Knesset, he once got a loan from someone for $100,000, no interest. I mean, I don't think that could happen with a politician or elected official in the United States.
So my question to you is the morale of the country down, or is it the morale of the country because of the Lebanese war down?
Well, I think the morale of the country is down primarily because of the Lebanese war. Although, you know, we're a very resilient country. It's not like, I was in Israel in 1973. I got married during the Yom Kippur War. And for about 6 or 8 months afterwards, the whole country seemed to be depressed, although we came back.
I was there during the Yom Kippur War. I went into Syria without a passport and went into Egypt without a passport.
Okay.
So I crossed the bridge with Sharon's troops, and I went to, you know what I found in Egypt?
What?
Flies.
Oh, flies.
A lot of flies.
Okay, but, you know, we came back
But I
very
wasn't at your
resilient.
wedding. I didn't come to your wedding.
Oh, well, I'm sorry.
You know, in
I'm
Israel,
sorry
by the
we
way,
didn't-
everybody goes to everybody's
I'm sorry we
wedding.
didn't invite you. It was during the ceasefire on the 23rd of October. In fact, I had what I called a half-brother from kibbutz. I was once adopted by a kibbutz family from Not Mordechai, and he was a pilot. Although I was married also with my brother-in-law at the same ceremony. We had a double ceremony, and he was called up. So we were hoping he would get out, and the other brother from reserves. It was a very hectic time, but Israel came back, and the country is already coming back from Lebanon. Now, without a doubt, the incident of the president of Israel, it's very depressing, very upsetting, and he defended himself on television.
But he denies, and this show takes a position until he's convicted. He's not. But some bad, nasty things happened, and it looks ugly because Mazuz, who's the Attorney General, said that he will indict him, and what's his name won a political battle last week because he was able to get a 3-month stay, so to speak, as president, which helps him till he has to lose his term. But Mazuz ordered him out of the president's house, and that looks pretty bad.
It's demeaning to him. But if it's demeaning to him, it's demeaning to the whole country, to all of us.
Yeah. So my question to you is the students, the young people who are going to lead the country. Do they react very well? It's just sort of in Israel that this gamzu, it'll pass over also.
Well, no. Well, I know from one of my sons, some of their friends, they talk about it. We've been out of classes for about 2 weeks, so this has gone by. But there's some cynicism amongst young people. They look around, they look at the leaders, they see the corruption. It's a problem.
Yeah. You belong to a great university, and they built a beautiful university down in the Negev, which was the dream of Ben Gurion. And the university is named after him.
Right.
How is the enrollment down there?
Well, the enrollment is very, very good. We're up to close to 18,000. I came in 1975. We had about 5,600 FTEs, full-time equivalents. In 1990, we had about 6,000. And today we're close to 18,000.
You have a very good medical school, too.
We have probably, I would like to say we have the best medical school east of Cambridge, Massachusetts. And one might say, how can you say that since we have such great medical schools every place in Israel? The one point that I would bring that in the late 1980s, there were 4 children of deans of medical schools going to medical school in Israel. They were all at Ben Gurion University.
Really? All right, we got to cut for a break. We'll come back with a very interesting man. He's Dr. Fred Lazin. Now, in Israel, if you call a guy a doctor, it doesn't mean that much. Professor's the big thing. Everything in Israel is professor. So I'm sure you're a tenured professor, so I'll call you Professor Fred Lazin, and we'll talk about his book, The Struggle for Soviet Jewry in America. But it's great, interesting topic. I happen to know a lot about it because I was involved in it, but it shows a lot of the problem between American Jewry and Israel, and Israelis, the way they think about America and vice versa. It's a fascinating area. We'll be right back.
In modern Middle East history, only one peace treaty has stood the test of time, the 1978 Camp David Accord. In the new documentary film, Backdoor Channels, The Price of Peace, learn the true story behind the greatest diplomatic achievement of our time and its lessons for the future.
The price of peace is very high to have this courageous man and my close friend killed.
Winner of the Telly Award for Best Cultural Program. Now available at select stores including Barnes & Noble and online at Amazon.com. Get the book that inspired the award-winning movie. Leon Charney's Backdoor Channels is now available in bookstores and online in paperback and an ebook for both Kindle and Nook. It's a great way to learn how history was made behind the scenes. Get it at Amazon.com or Barnes & Noble. Be a witness to history. Order Backdoor Channels online at Amazon.com or buy it at Barnes & Noble and get the real story behind the making of the 1978 Camp David Accords.
Anywhere else, this would be a vacation on the Mediterranean. But here, it's also a journey into history. From modern Tel Aviv to the ancient cities of Herod, the Romans, the Crusaders. The history of Israel lives in all of us. Come find the Israel in you.
We're back. I hope I pronounced it correctly. Lazin?
Lazin.
Lazin.
Okay.
Lazin. Okay. And it probably was not Lazin, but Lazinski or something, right?
Something like that. Lezhik.
And he's written an interesting book called The Struggle for Soviet Jewry in American Politics, Israel versus the American Jewish Establishment. It's not only in Soviet Jewry, it's in a lot of different things. When I was representing Yitzhak Rabin, the former prime minister, and Ezer Weitzman, many times they were unnerved about AIPAC. AIPAC was taking positions which those two gentlemen thought was causing them to think that they were the foreign ministry of Israel. And this is a huge struggle all the time between the American Jews and Israel, and how to come to terms with it. And you probably are an expert on that now, and it's symptomatic in the struggle for the Soviet Jewry and the American politics. So what do you think causes that, by the way?
Well, I think what causes it is, and what I've learned from my study of this book is, the American Jewish community has its own interests. You know, when we think of these, the recent works by Mersheimer and Walt about the AIPAC and the control of supposed control of American foreign policy, and one assumes there's like a Jewish cabal out there controlled by Israel. One should look at the Soviet Jewry movement as an example of Jews in American politics, where American Jewish leaders, primarily the CJF, the federations, they defined their own interest, which is very different from that of Israel. And they acted independently of
because
Israel.
They have local things that they care. They have community centers, and they have old age homes, etc.
Well, what happened at a certain point in time, I mean, some people suggest they saw the opportunity to replenish the community. We hadn't had Jewish immigration coming to the United States. All of a sudden, here were Soviet Jews coming in, tens of thousands.
Right.
And many community leaders wanted these people. Chicago, for example, had a policy of the maximum number of Jews coming to the community. Some American Jews preferred them to come here rather than to come to Israel. Others were very much involved in this principle, which you mentioned before, of freedom of choice. Let these people go wherever they want. They want to come to America, we have to help them. And that they did through the 1980s, until a certain point when they stopped.
Yitzhak Shamir, in interviews on this show, said to me his greatest achievement was the fact that he brought 1 million Soviet Jews to Israel. This was his greatest achievement. You know, he was the longest serving prime minister in Israel's history. Very few people really, they forget that, but he was the longest serving prime minister. You may correct me, but I believe...
No, but I would... I can understand with Shamir saying that. I mean, someone who's lived in Israel since 1975.
Right.
One of the greatest things that's happened to Israel since I've been living there is the fact that 1 million Jews came from the former Soviet Union.
Right.
It's changed Israel.
That's what he said.
For better or for worse. Or some people would be upset about, you were talking before about treif meat and things like that. In Beersheba, there's a supermarket open on Saturdays, and they sell various...
Pork.
They sell pork and shrimp and other things like that, the Tiv Tam supermarket chain. things like that. That's part of the Soviet influence. But my only reservation that I had is, I mean, I wouldn't give Shamir all the credit. You have to look at the liaison bureau, people like Nehemiah Lebanon and Golda Meir and others that really pushed this thing all along.
Oh, sure.
Although in all fairness, when Begin became prime minister and Lebanon was still in charge of the liaison bureau of Nativ,
right.
He kept Lebanon on for 2 years to make sure that there would be continuity. And what's interesting is that out of all the prime ministers in Israel, the, quote, softest on the Soviet Jewry issue was Menachem Begin. Menachem Begin was the one prime minister that at times was willing to put family before country. People had relatives, if they have a son or a daughter in the States, let them go to America.
Really?
That was his position.
It's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Because Shamir was the other way.
Yeah, Shamir was the opposite.
He wanted to bring those people in.
Yeah, and Shamir came to the United States, approached the American government, said, you know, close the gates. Don't give them refugee status. That's the way it was done.
When you teach poli-sci in Beersheba, what do you teach about the Israeli politics?
Oh yeah, well I teach both. I mean, it depends what course I teach. I teach in Hebrew, and when you teach a course, let's say like in policy implementation, you teach general theories, then you bring examples. Often the texts bring examples from the United States, and then you supplement them with examples from Israeli politics.
Let me ask you a question. Talk to me about some of the personalities of Israel and how historically they'll be remembered. Will Yitzhak Rabin be remembered as a great prime minister?
Okay, well I would start with Golda Meir.
Let me tell you what I think about Golda Meir.
Okay.
I think she was a disaster. I think she was the worst prime minister in the history of Israel. So far, maybe Olmert will bag her on that one. What do you think?
Okay, well, we don't have to spend much time talking about Golda Meir. I think history is going to be very unkind to her.
You agree?
Despite the fact that she's very popular in the United States,
know.
but the Yom Kippur War was her doing.
You want me to tell you another story about Golda Meir?
Well, you asked me about Rabin.
No, I'm going to tell you a story about Golda Meir. I was in her office in 1972 with Senator Hartke, and we told her we had a special opportunity to speak to the Egyptian hierarchy. And she sat there with Simcha Dinitz and Eli Mizrahi. These were two operatives,
I know both of them.
And she said to it, we don't care. We're not worried about Egypt at all. 9 months later, you had the Yom Kippur War. That's why I believe she's not going to go down in history as a great prime minister. Let's continue.
Now with Rabin, I think Rabin will be remembered for Oslo, making peace with
Which he reluctantly he did not want to do.
Reluctantly, but he shook hands and he did start a process which I think once, in my opinion, once Rabin was assassinated, there was no chance of Oslo working. Peres couldn't do it, no one else. The other prime minister who I also have a great deal of respect for, and I'm not a fan, I was never a fan politically, is Menachem Begin. Menachem Begin brought about a great deal of social equality in Israel. He basically opened up the country to Jews from Arab countries, opportunities. And you know,
the Sephardic Jews, and they put them in office. Yes.
They used to joke in Israel. He once had a minister of finance named Ariador, that every time
Yoram Aridor.
Ariador with the
Aridor, A-R-I-D-R, later on became ambassador to the UN.
Okay, well every time there'd be an election, they'd always drop the taxes on videos and TVs. That used to be the joke. But the fact is that Begin was responsible for most people having a washing machine in the house and a lot of other things. I mean, he really was a good prime minister.
I think, and I never met him, I did meet his son and grandson. I think Levi Eshkol was one of the great prime ministers of Israel. He doesn't get the credit yet. He's sort of sleeping. But I think the history will show that he was an excellent prime minister, and during the Six-Day War, he had the presence to bring in Dayan at that point, because there was a lot of confusion. Now, my oral history comes from talking with Ezer Weitzman, who was a very close friend of mine, so I hear everything first. You know, I don't read the books on that. Weitzman was once traveling on a plane with myself and Peter Jennings, the ABC newscaster, who was a bit anti-Israel. It was considered to be at least a little bit anti-Israel. So he finished his Time magazine, Jennings, and he came over to Weitzman. He said, "Mr. Minister, would you like to see Time magazine?" And he says, "Mr. Jennings, I don't read history, I make it." That was the end of Peter Jennings.
But you know, when we talk about prime ministers, of course, there's David Ben-Gurion. Without David Ben-Gurion, we probably would not have had a state, which is
The
obvious.
biography on Ben-Gurion was written by a friend of mine, Mickey Belzohar,
Okay.
right? Ben-Gurion's grandson was on this show.
Amos.
Amos.
Yeah.
And he was an interesting guy, Ben-Gurion. Very few people know how fascinating he was. I mean, he was stubborn. The biggest thing, I think, in his life, two big things in his lifetime, maybe you'll agree, not the Alatalena, when he had a fire on that ship, which was bringing him arms, a Jew versus a Jew, which Yitzhak Rabin ultimately had to do. And the second thing was the compensation from Germany. This was a huge, huge problem. He agreed to allow Germany to give reparations to the Jews, and there's a firestorm. There was a big firestorm about it, but at the end, these were probably two very powerful decisions that he was able to make. But you know what Weitzman always told me? Every prime minister ends his days ingloriously. They all end in an inglorious way. Ben-Gurion went out terribly. Begin went out as a lost soul after the Lebanese War. Levi Eshkol, I think, died, right, in his office. Shamir got credit for saying no, no, no to everything.
Right.
And he's still alive. He's an interesting man, by the way. Shamir, we have a lot of interviews with him.
Well, the other thing I would add about Shamir is the 91 war, the first Iraqi war, where he kept Israel out.
The Scuds.
I think there was a almost brilliant leadership, because I think that if Israel had gone into the war, from what I understand today, if we didn't have the codes from the United States, the Israeli Air Force probably would have been as ineffective as, it's a hard thing to say, as the American Air Force was in Iraq in getting those missiles.
And you know,
I think as a consequence of Israel staying out of the war, it was the end of the Arab boycott.
But he was forced to do it by Lawrence Eagleberger, who came over to see him. That was the American policy, but you're right. He kept to that policy. That was very hard to restrain.
Oh, and everyone in the country was opposed to him, and all his fellow ministers thought he was too soft in that particular time, but he held his own, regardless of American pressure. But even if he decided to disregard it, it probably would have been a disaster. And he resisted that.
Well, you know what's interesting in Israel is how strong the Barak court was. And I'm sure, you know, there was a lot of, Israel has no constitution. They have basic law. What's your opinion? We got about 1 minute. Do you think Barak will go down in history as a great justice for Israel?
I think without a doubt it will be a great justice, but I think Barak was always very cautious.
Oh, really?
Especially on all these issues involving the territories and decisions, the court was always very, very cautious. Defense always came first. National interest became first before certain issues. That's my opinion, although he was a very, very strong judge, and he enhanced the standing of the Supreme Court without a doubt.
Fred, we're out of time. It's interesting to talk to you. We can compare notes. The name of the book is The Struggle for Soviet Jewry in American Politics. I can tell you he's got some great kudos here from a lot of people. So if I were you, I would probably take a look at this book, because it's not only Soviet Jews, it's all about the relationship, the organic relationship between Israel and American Jews, which is a perennial problem, sometimes an issue. But it goes on. Jews feel very committed to Israel, most of them I know. Anyway, we'll see you next week. We hope you enjoyed our intellectual foray into the Soviet Union and to the Holocaust. Two interesting subjects.
The following program is brought to you in part by the film Backdoor Channels, The Price of Peace.
Welcome to another Leon Charney Report, and we are broadcasting to you from Tel Aviv, Israel, sunny Israel. Beautiful weather here. I'll tell you, maybe politics are not that great, but or maybe they are. Today we have General Yatom. What a career. Man was full star, let's say we call it in the United States, a major general, chief of the Central Command, military secretary to Yitzhak Rabin. This is without notes. And then he led the Mossad, which is the CIA of Israel, and now is a member of Knesset. What a whirlwind tour. All the way from general to politician. That's not so, well, Dayan did it, Azer did it, a lot of guys did it. But you had a lot of posts, Danny. Which was your most interesting?
I think that my most interesting one was to be the military advisor to the late Rabin.
Really?
Yeah, even though it was not a duty of combat, it was a staff duty. I was a staff officer for Rabin. And when I compare it to all the other duties that I have done, especially commanding units, commanding combat units, this was the most challenging one, this was the most interesting one, due to the man, the late Rabin, that I admired, and due to the circumstances, because he led then Israel to the peace treaty with Jordan, and he tried to do peace also with the Palestinians and with the Syrians. And the period was very, very interesting. Unfortunately, inter alia, we also experienced very difficult terror attacks, very disturbing terror attacks, but when I look at it and I put my finger on the bottom line, the most interesting one was this duty. Then, of course, when I was director of Mossad, and when I was a very young combatant and platoon leader in Sayeret Matkal, which is the highest elite commando unit in Israel. Those are my cherished 3 posts.
I was very close to Rabin. You may not, you know,
Remember you met him every now and then?
I met him a lot. In fact, he signed my ketubah with Lazer Weitzman, so we were very close. And you know, his grandson saw me last night in a restaurant. Jonathan, I think his name is, and he said, you know, Leon, I'm in New York now for a while. I got to tell you how much my grandfather loved you. And I said, well, we loved each other. But in the early, you weren't there, he was defense minister. I was asked by Weitzman to go see Arafat in Tunis. You probably know all this, but, and Weitzman desperately wanted me to go. Shamir was not so happy about it. In fact, he threw Weitzman out of the inner cabinet that time.
Yeah, he fired him.
Okay. So, but I said, I got to go check with Rabin, because Rabin is a pal of mine. So I go to see Rabin, and Rabin says, listen, Leon, you're an American, you can do what you want, which to me was a pass to go. I went to see another guy that you must have loved too, Chaim Bar-Lev.
Yes,
and
the late Chaim Bar-Lev.
Chaim Bar-Lev says, if I could go with you, I would go myself. I want to see this guy. Shimon Peres said, full steam, go. So I went. Rabin said to me, he's going to use you for publicity. That was the time that Rita Hauser was doing some shtick in Stockholm, and he'll take advantage of you all the way. When I met Arafat, and I went there, Arafat, all I want is a secret meeting with Rabin. Secret meeting with Rabin. I go back and I report to Rabin, and Rabin dismissed him. He said, he's a terrorist. I don't want to know from him. Peres said, keep talking to the guy. Chaim Bar-Lev said, keep it going. Azer said, can we do business with him? I had asked Arafat to save the 3 MIAs you had at that time, and he was supposed to come back to me in 2 weeks, which he never did, because we found out Arafat's a pretty good liar.
Mm-hmm. You know that they are missing until today.
Yeah, I know. Fast forward to the White House lawn. He shakes his hand very reluctantly. Mm-hmm. And fast forward again, Rabin assassinated, and who goes to see him at a shiva? Arafat. Can you explain all this to me?
Yeah, I was there when Rabin came to the conclusion that he had, for the sake of Israel and for the sake of the Middle East, he had to talk to Arafat. It was for him very difficult because the way you put it, he hated Arafat, and he looked at him as Arafat was then, which is true, unfortunately, until today, as he was a gang leader, a leader of a gang of terrorists.
Right.
But after 4 years of Intifada, the first Intifada, and after Rabin came to the conclusion that the only way to try and to put end to the violence and to put end to terror and to put end to the conflict between us and the Palestinians is to talk to the Palestinians, he tried firstly to talk with leadership from the territories, from Judea, Samaria, and the Gaza Strip. He tried to talk to locals. And when the Israeli delegation met the Palestinian, then the Palestinian Jordanian delegation in Washington, we found very easily through intelligence means that those locals, they did nothing without talking on a daily basis, very frequently to Arafat. So very immediate, Rabin came to the conclusion that if he really wanted to make business or try to make business with the Palestinians, he had to go to the one and the only one on the Palestinian side that decides, and this was Arafat. Then there was an exchange of letters where Rabin acknowledged the PLO to be the representative of the Palestinian people.
And they acknowledged
And
Israel.
they acknowledged the existence of the state of Israel. And then there were also commitments on Arafat's side not to carry on with violence,
Right.
but to try and to solve everything through peaceful means around the table. But Arafat failed, and he didn't do it. Rabin tended, as the time went on, he knew Arafat very well, and he was ready to continue and to talk to Arafat in order to try and to push forward the peace process. And it looked, generally speaking, then there were climaxes where it looked very positive.
Right.
Very positive. And Arafat, I remember I participated, I was very lucky. Rabin took me to all the meetings, secret meetings, public meetings with Arafat, with the late King Hussein,
Right.
with all the other meetings. Once he held a secret meeting, for instance, with the Prime Minister of Indonesia in Paris. And I was there, and I remember Arafat. Arafat was a little bit afraid from Rabin. He respected Rabin very deeply. And whenever they met, Arafat sat, on the edge of the chair in a very stiff way, as if he was waiting that Rabin will shout at him or whatever. And but he respected Rabin, and he believed to Rabin's words. And whenever Rabin said no, it was no. And whenever Rabin said, okay, yes, I accept, for instance, your request, Mr. Arafat, then Arafat was sure that this is something that is going to be implemented, no doubt about it. And when Rabin was assassinated, Arafat came to the Shiva to present his condolences to Leah Rabin, to the late Leah Rabin. And I was there when he came to Rabin's quarter here in Tel Aviv. And he said, of course, he wept. He cried, Arafat. I think that he understood that the assassination is a very severe setback to any potential negotiation between us and the Palestinians. And unfortunately, Leon, let me tell you that since the assassination, everything was changed here in Israel.
I agree.
Since then, the peace process between us and the Palestinians till now did not revive.
I agree with you totally. The assassination of Yitzhak Rabin changed this country in a way we still don't know.
I agree.
But Did there come a time, Danny, when Rabin really believed Arafat's words, or was he always skeptical?
No, he was skeptical. There is a saying in Hebrew, kabdeu v'chashdeu, meaning respect him, but be cautious
Yeah,
with him.
because that was a 180 turnaround thing.
Exactly. It was 180 degrees turning around due to the fact that Rabin, he was a very reasonable man. And he worked mainly with logics and not with his emotions.
Right.
And then the logic way, of course, prevailed over the emotions. The emotions told him not to touch Arafat and not to get close to Arafat. But the way he thought in a logic way was the way I described previously, meaningly, if he said to himself, Rabin, if there was a way to make peace, it is only with this guy.
I'll tell you some history that I know, and maybe you concur, maybe not. Rabin was the prime minister, but Shimon Peres was the chairman, and there was still a little bit of conflict. And Peres wanted Nissim Zvili to be secretary general, and Rabin wanted somebody else. Peres also wanted Weizmann to be president, and Weizmann and Rabin had their conflict since the time when the Six-Day War.
The Six-Day War, when Weizmann was his deputy.
Right.
And his deputy.
And there was a big scandal about Rabin collapsing. They said it was nicotine poisoning. I pretty close to Weizmann, so I hear one story from I never asked Rabin about it, and it's irrelevant, but maybe you know, this is historical. Rabin said to Weizmann in '67, you take over as chief of staff. And Weizmann said to him, no, it's your war, you take it, we'll build you up. But there was always this antipathy. In fact, one day, Milka Ben-Ari and Uri Ben-Ari put a dinner together with me, Chaim Bar-Lev, Rabin, and Weizmann in my honor. This is to make a sulchan. But in terms of he had something like Sharon, he had the people with him, Rabin, but he didn't have the party. And Peres was gung-ho. I remember meeting Peres down here on a Friday at the Kiryat. He says, Leon, I'm going forward with this peace process. I'm going. And I think Rabin politically said, you know what, and maybe for your reasons also, for the good of the country, we just got to hold in, because he was a reluctant warrior on this one. I mean, I want your gut feeling on Arafat today. What do you think of this guy? He's just a terrorist?
Well, the answer is yes. Till Camp David.
Because we all gave him a chance.
Yeah. Till Camp David.
Camp David too.
Camp David too, when Barak was the Prime Minister. And
you were with him.
I was with Barak, I was his Chief of Staff.
Right.
And he took me with him. I was in the very inner circle and in the very small delegation, Israeli delegation, that stayed in Camp David with Clinton, then the President of the United States. And the Palestinian delegation came to Camp David. And the goal of Camp David was, what we wanted to achieve is a peace. Because we tried with the delegates. Shlomo Ben-Ami then was the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Right.
And he went every now and then and met Saeb Arikat and many other Palestinians. Nothing came out of it. Nothing. They dragged their legs all the time. So Barak and Clinton came to the conclusion that enough is enough. And we need to give a chance by having a summit with the top leaders. Only with the top leaders maybe we could achieve something. But we had no doubt to check it and to find out either the theory is right or wrong. Then Clinton called upon the summit. It was July 2000. He called upon the summit. And Arafat was reluctant to come. He was afraid that this is an American-Israeli trap, and that we are going to trap him and to put him in the corner and to push him in order to get some concessions out of him. But finally, the Americans persuaded him to come. They came, and after 3, 4, 5 days, I really don't recall, the American President Clinton put a proposal on the table. And it was a proposal to act as basis for further negotiation. the components of it were that Israel will withdraw from something like 95% of the territories and will hold it, will get it back to the Palestinians, that approximately 80% of the settlers will remain under Israeli sovereignty at blocks of settlements very close to the Green Line that will be annexed to Israel, that there will be no right of return to the Palestinians, this is the Americans, yeah? And that there will be a division of Jerusalem, meaning all the Muslim quarters will be under Palestinian sovereignty, and all the Jewish quarters, including those that were built after the 67 war on a so-called Jordanian territory, will be under Israeli sovereignty. We accepted it. It was very tough to the Israeli delegation to accept it, because the proposal called for the division of Jerusalem, and it was against the way Barak stated it in the campaign of his election, and even at the eve of Camp David.
It was a big gamble.
Yeah, yeah.
Barak, by the way, Barak sat on his chair when we interviewed him.
So I'm honored to sit on the same chair.
But he said the following, and I'm sure you'll obviously concur. He said, Leon, I put a proposal there, and I never got a counter proposal.
Yeah, this was the proposal. Arafat, at the beginning, refused to say yes or not. He played with the Americans. Clinton went again and again and asked him. Finally, Arafat said no. Finally, Arafat said no to the American proposal. And this was the end of the summit, and as a matter of fact, some very short time later, the new Intifada broke out. Then in Camp David, after seeing Arafat hundreds times, myself, after spending with him hundreds of hours, then I came to the conclusion that Arafat is not a partner, because he was not and he is not ready to take into consideration the vital interest of the State of Israel. And he was not then ready, and he is not till now ready to accept the fact that there is a Jewish people on earth. Right. He was ready, and he is ready to accept only the right of Israel to exist. But his idea is that Israel will be a country in the Middle East where Palestinians, Arabs, Muslims, Jewish will be able to live together, and finally, God forbid, we will find here that the majority are not any longer Jewish. Yeah, now you know that this is the only Jewish democratic state on earth, and there is no way to continue the existence of the State of Israel as a Jewish state unless we maintain our vast majority as Jewish people. Right. So I understood that with this guy Arafat, we could move only to limited distance, but not more than that. And since then, this is the situation.
So
there is a collapse in the negotiation.
What are these guys like Balin? What do they expect? Do they believe that Arafat can really make peace? I mean, you tried as hard as anybody in the world. Barak certainly gave his heart and soul. I know that. Rabin gave his heart. Asa Weitzman had him at his house as president of Israel.
Gave his heart and soul.
Right. So how do these left-wing guys keep continuing and thinking that this can happen?
Well, you know, Israel is a democratic state.
No, I'm not against the democracy. I'm into the theory.
Firstly, for me, it is very difficult to understand, because you know it will be more fair if you will ask them and not me. I'm not a commentator to try and to explain the way they think. But for instance, I reject the Geneva proposal,
right,
mainly because in the one that reads in an humble way, in a naive way, the Geneva wordings, will find out that the Palestinians have right of return to Israel. And this is something that we have to reject, whoever is going to be the government of the State of Israel.
And there's where Bush helped Israel, because Bush made it a policy of the United States government that the right of return is off the table, which is like a Balfour Declaration.
No, the first that did it was Clinton, of course, with his suggestion, proposal in Camp David.
But the guy who codified it,
yes,
was Bush.
No doubt that Bush clarified it, and no doubt that Bush strengthened it.
Right.
That's true. That's true.
Right.
There is no way, if the Palestinians have to understand the following, and we have to understand some other things. And let me try to say it.
Let me cut for one break, and then we'll come back and we'll hear Danny's plan. Don't leave us.
In modern Middle East history, only one peace treaty has stood the test of time, the 1978 Camp David Accord. In the new documentary film, Backdoor Channels, The Price of Peace, learn the true story behind the greatest diplomatic achievement of our time and its lessons for the future.
The price of peace is very high to have this courageous man and my close men killed.
Winner of the Telly Award for Best Cultural Program. Now available at select stores including Barnes & Noble and online at Amazon.com. Now get the book the hit movie was based on, Leon Charney's Backdoor Channels. Learn about the Backdoor Channel negotiations that led to the historic 1978 Israeli-Egyptian peace treaty. Become a witness to history and order Backdoor Channels online at Amazon or Barnes & Noble. Also available at all other retailers and booksellers. Or download the audiobook at iTunes or Audible.com. Relive history. Order Backdoor Channels. Get best-selling author Leon Charney's latest book, The Battle of the Two Talmuds. Join Charney as he explores years of Jewish history to find out why and how Talmudic scholars and rabbis abandoned the Holy Land for the lands of the diaspora. Learn about the power struggles behind the creation of the Jerusalem and Babylonian Talmuds. It's a book critics call engaging and enlightening. A book which will be of interest to people of every faith. Now available at Amazon and Barnes & Noble, or download the audiobook of The Battle of the Two Talmuds at iTunes or Audible.com. Leon Charney sets out to discover the true meaning of the Kaddish, the Jewish custom of reciting a prayer to commemorate the death of a close relative. Join Charney as he finds out the history of the Kaddish and how it has evolved. Reviewed as a refreshing walk through Jewish history and a book that deserves to be read by both Jews and non-Jews, The Mystery of the Kaddish is now available online at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all other retailers and booksellers. Or download the audiobook at Audible.com or on iTunes. Discover The Mystery of the Kaddish.
We're back. I'm Leon Charney. We're talking to a very fascinating man. He's General Yatom, and he was in the Sayeret Makal, which is the elite commando group. That's one thing. In charge of the central command. There are only 3 commands in Israel. Head of the Mossad, which is a tremendous, tremendous job. We'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. Advisor to Yitzhak Rabin, who was on his way to making peace, possibly with Arafat, and we'll talk about that. Both of us think he's a terrorist at this moment, and we don't believe he's going to change. And now he's a Labour Party MK. Fascinating career. All right, Donnie, so you were telling us about what you think is going to happen over there.
Yeah, what I think the Palestinians should accept or should understand that if they will accept the fact that there will be no implementation of right of return of Palestinian refugees to Israel, and that they will be able, of course, to return to Palestine whenever Palestine will be born. And if they will understand that they have to do their utmost in order to tackle terror, to fight terror, there is no way that they will continue to cherish terror or to develop, to encourage terror, and at the same time, parallel to it, to try and to do business with Israel. This is not, I do not put it as a condition, as a precondition. I said once there will be the resumption of the talks, they will have to show us that they mean business, and they are going to participate in combating terror. And the second and the third thing that they should understand is that Israel, of course, is the homeland of the Jewish people. And there is a Jewish people, not only Israel and not only Israelis. Israel should serve as the homeland for the Jewish people the way Palestine should serve as the homeland for the Palestinian people. What we, the Israelis, should understand in order to being able to bridge gaps with the Palestinians. Firstly, we have to understand that we will have to withdraw from the majority of the territories. Something close to the Clinton proposal that was put on the table in Camp David, meaningly to withdraw entirely from the Gaza Strip and to withdraw from 95, 93% of Judea and Samaria, but to leave the majority of the settlers, not the majority of the settlements, the majority of the settlers to live, to allow them to continue and to live their normal lives under Israeli sovereignty when the main blocks of settlements will be annexed to Israel. And we have to understand that we will have also to divide Jerusalem, because this is also a dispute about Jerusalem. But what is the meaning of the division of Jerusalem? Today, for instance, there are 250,000 Palestinians residing in Jerusalem. They have Israeli ID cards. You know, they enjoy Israeli social security payments. And, but there is no Israeli control over those suburbs. And the municipality of Jerusalem, for instance, does not serve those Palestinian quarters. So the proposal, my proposal is that we will draw a line in a context of an agreement, of course, not in a context of something less than an agreement. We'll draw a line between us and the Palestinians, and they will have, the Palestinians will have, all the Muslim quarters, all the Muslim external neighborhoods of Jerusalem, and we will continue to maintain our sovereignty over the entire Jewish population in Jerusalem, which is extended since 67, and you know that there are approximately 11 new Israeli/new Jewish neighborhoods in the municipality of Jerusalem, which are built on a former territory of Jordan, meaning a territory that was occupied by us during the 6 Days War. So this might be a basis for a deal. If the Palestinians will be ready to, especially to withdraw their demand for right of return, and we will be ready to understand that we are going to make concessions of about 95% of the territories, then we have a basis for the resumption of the talks, and hopefully it will lead us to end of conflict.
In modern Middle East history, only one peace treaty has stood the test of time, the 1978 Camp David Accord. In the new documentary film, Backdoor Channels, The Price of Peace, learn the true story behind the greatest diplomatic achievement of our time and its lessons for the future.
The price of peace is very high. To have this courageous man and my close men killed.
Winner of the Telly Award for Best Cultural Program. Now available at select stores including Barnes & Noble and online at Amazon.com. Now get the book the hit movie was based on, Leon Charney's Backdoor Channels. Learn about the Backdoor Channel negotiations that led to the historic 1978 Israeli-Egyptian peace treaty. Become a witness to history and order Backdoor Channels online at Amazon or Barnes & Noble. Also available at all other retailers and booksellers. Or download the audiobook at iTunes or Audible.com. Relive history. Order Backdoor Channels. Available now over iTunes, Amazon, and Google Play. Leon Charney's cantorial CD and Disco Lam. Listen as Charney movingly sings El Moleh Rachamim and Charney's amazing rendition of a disco remix of Adon Olam, all sung in the incredible and individual Charney style. Also listen to the CDs on Rhapsody. Download Leon Charney's cantorial songs and Disco Lam, the disco remix of Adon Olam on Amazon, iTunes, and Google Play. Or listen in on Rhapsody. All available now.
We're back. It's fascinating talking with General Dani Yatom. He's a member of the Labor Party today. We know about his military accomplishments. And the Labor Party seems to be, I don't know where it is. There are 19 members of the Knesset. They thought they might be going into the government until the Central Committee of the Likud decided that Arak Sharon was acting without authority of the Likud. So they said that he couldn't go forward with disengagement plan. Shimon Peres, I believe, was buying his Hamburg already and maybe another suit to become the foreign minister. Sylvan Shalom organized all his friends that he takes care of every week by going to bar mitzvahs and weddings and whatever he does to keep them happy. And so everything is topsy-turvy. And Shimon Peres, the leader of the Labor Party, where Donnie is a member, said today that he's going into opposition, and everybody, even on disengagement, I'm not going to give a safety net to Sharon. Everybody will have to make up his own mind and vote his conscience. Is that a correct statement?
Yes.
So where do you go from here?
Well, we suffered a setback during the last election. And from being, until, let's say, 30 years ago, the largest or the biggest party, during the last 30 years, we are not, except 2 periods, the Likud leads the government and not the Labour Party. Only twice we won elections, once with the late Rabin, and the second time with Barak. And we have to rehabilitate the government because the government fell apart. And we have firstly to rehabilitate the government. We have to start acting as an opposition without any manipulations, because during the negotiation between us and the Likud, in order to find out if there is a basis for founding a unity government,
Right.
we stop to behave like an opposition. An opposition is part of the democratic life, and we have to be a fighting opposition. And we have to call upon for new elections. Look, Sharon enjoys today a minority government. And it will
But
be
he's popular in the, what do you call it?
Yes, he is popular, but it will be very difficult for him to continue and to lead his party.
True.
Which he lost during the last event that you have mentioned, Leon. The Central Committee of the Likud, as a matter of fact, said twice
They turned
no,
right.
twice no to Prime Minister Sharon. I think first time in the history of the Likud, the party, that the leader of the Likud was not successful in persuading and passing his proposal. They rejected his proposal.
It's unheard of.
And they voted for the proposal of his...
When I was doing Camp David, Jimmy Carter sent me to see Menachem Begin, and there was some issue there. And I said, Mr. Prime Minister, the President would like to know if your party's behind you. And he said to me, I'll never forget this, Mr. Charney, if I make a decision, my party will be behind me. It's just the way he spoke, by the way,
Yeah,
that Polish accent. And you're right, this could never have happened with
Yeah,
Begin.
that's true. So now Sharon has not any longer the same power amongst his own people, the way he used to have before the convention of the Central Committee. And it will be very difficult for him to continue and to develop and to push forward the separation, the disengagement from the Palestinians. So probably we are heading towards general elections
again?
earlier than planned, during 2005. And if we want to be a competitor
Yeah.
to in those elections, we have to start acting as an opposition. We have to start rehabilitate our party, and we have to make all the arrangements in order to face the coming elections that will probably take place at the mid of next year. The first move that we have to do, amongst others, but one of the first moves internally, we have to call upon early internal election for the chairman, and we will have to vote for chairman. Peres is our chairman. He was elected for an interim period, and we have to elect somebody, or we have to elect a leader, not somebody, which will lead us while rehabilitating the party and while arranging ourselves or preparing ourselves to coming elections. I hope that Barak will be convinced to come back and to enter back into politics, that he will be convinced and persuaded, and I'm working very, very hardly in order to persuade him.
Hard.
And I hope that...
Not hardly, hard.
Very hard, sorry. You know English.
No, but it's a difference there.
Yeah, very
hardly
hard.
working.
No, very hard,
Right.
sorry, very hard, to persuade him, and I hope that finally he will accept the request of many of the members of the party and will come back. He will have to fight in order to be elected as chairman. It won't be that easy, but I think that he have the best chances.
Does he have
than
roots in the
anybody else.
party? Does he have
yes,
roots?
he have roots. He has many roots in the party. And once he will lead us, I think that we will have a much better chance to beat the Likud during the coming elections.
Is this your first term as an MK?
Yeah, I entered into politics when I was 57 years old.
Is it fun for you?
Well, it is not fun, but it is interesting.
And do you feel the intellectual challenge, or the Knesset sometimes, you're a backbencher basically, so you're in a minority, so
Yeah.
you don't have, we interviewed Ruby Rivlin, happens to be a good friend of mine, and he's very fair in the Knesset. And
He's very fair in the Knesset, I agree.
He does a great job. But you guys are still backbenchers, and you, who have this military and intelligence background, is unbelievable. You got to sit there and listen to a lot of guys and drink a lot of tea in the Miznon,
That's true.
It's not so easy.
That's true. After accomplishing my career as the chief of staff of Barak, and previously, as you said, I was head of Mossad, etc., I was a businessman. I entered into business. And I enjoyed it very, very much. And life was very comfortable, let me tell you. But I came to the conclusion that the situation, it was 2 years ago, it is true as we are speaking right now. The situation of the State of Israel is bad. We deteriorate in many areas and aspects. And I decided to cut my career as a businessman and to go for the first time to politics for the first time.
Yeah, you jumped. What were you?
I jumped and I entered into political life only 10 days
Wow.
before the internal early elections
Really? What number
in the
were you?
party.
Oh.
And I came 8,
Wow.
only having 10 days or 8 days of campaign.
So
That's all.
maybe you'll be prime minister.
Maybe, I don't know. I do not reject the idea, but only after Barak.
We'll make an announcement. Here's the scoop.
Only after Barak.
You're really loyal to Mr. Barak. How old is Barak today?
Barak is 63.
He looks good, though.
He looks excellent and he's a terrific guy. You know, Leon, that I know him for the last 40 years.
Well, you and Barak have a memorable occasion in my life, because my twins were born the same day. I entered a meeting to see you guys. I think you were at the Waldorf or something. You had
Yes,
just come
true.
to town, and Danny said, my first congratulations on my kids.
Yeah.
Memorable. Donnie, let's talk about this Franklin business. I know in the early stages, Wolf Blitzer sent me a fella named Pollard, and I represented him for about 24 hours. Now, you probably know or not know, but he was represented by a guy named Haibi. Haibi was a Lebanese Christian. They pleaded him guilty in 24 hours, and then Weinberg gave this famous memo where they won't release this guy. Les Aspin, who was a very good friend of Israel, told me that no matter what he did, he could not do anything for Pollard. So the feeling was that what Pollard did was maybe good for Israel, but it compromised CIA guys in Moscow. And Tenet said to Clinton, "I would resign," and he writes that in his book if he goes down. So, but this Franklin thing, do you have any belief in this? Tell me what it. You guys are smart. I mean, this is you're not gonna sometimes.
No, most of the time. We are smart most of the time. Let me tell you, Leon, I'm acquainted very well with the situation,
Sure.
not with the specific data of Franklin. Remember that I was twice the advisor to the Prime Minister and Minister of Defense. I was myself the head of Mossad, and I know how important are the relations between Israel and the United States, and how do we cherish the relations between the Mossad and the CIA. It is a terrific relation. And no one in Israel will never dare to act illegally in the United States, recruiting somebody or operating somebody After, of course, the polar.
Yeah, but that was Lakam. That was not the Mossad.
Yeah, never mind. But
Lakam was a special division in the Defense Ministry, which was doing intelligence.
And was disbanded after, as part of our lessons learned after the eruption of the Pollard affair. Since then, everybody in Israel is restricted to operate illegally in the United States, and we do not do it whatsoever. We are transparent to the United States, we cooperate, and we do not operate against any interest of the United States. And I'm sure that this is the situation of today. I'm not acquainted with the details about Franklin, but I'm sure that it is not Pollard B, it is not Pollard 2, there is no espionage over there. Let me tell you another, about the suspicion of some high-ranking officials in the United States. When I was the Mossad director, I was called by Tenet, then the CIA director. He told me, Danny, we, the CIA, think that you, the Mossad, have an agent in the CIA operating for the Mossad against the CIA. I said to Tenet via the telephone, there is no way whatsoever. And it took me 24 hours. I had to fly to the United States to talk to Tenet face to face and to convince him and to persuade him that it was a false accusation. And of course, he was convinced and they apologized. What happened? They were listening to a telephone conversation between two official Mossad representatives in Washington. They were intercepting the
telephone.
Probably what the United States does, Israel shouldn't do. And there was a misinterpretation of the discussion. And as a result of it, to tell you how easily it was, they came to a false conclusion.
Wow.
As if we have an agent, a spy in the CIA. But it was also, let me be fair to say that it was, at the end, Tenet was convinced fully, the file was closed, they apologized, and everything came back to track.
It's a fascinating story. And I was speaking to Weitzman about this. The question is, and I'm sure this Franklin guy is probably innocent, but who was trying to stimulate this problem? They broke the story on a Friday night, which is a very quiet weekend for news, and then it became the story Saturday and Sunday. Now it's dying down. And the question for the American, and maybe the American Jews, is what's going on there? It's not really Israel's problem, but what's happening over there. And I think the American Jewish community really has to look into it. Is it a gang up against Wolfowitz and Feith, who are Jewish guys? We don't know. But certainly we got to look into it. It makes an uncomfortable feeling, and people should be very, very aware of it. I want to talk to you. I had Steinitz Yuval on a show last week. He said the following. He said the Mossad and military intelligence told us and the Israeli government 2 days before the war in Iran that they had reason... In Iraq, excuse me, hardly. See, you made me good. That they had good reason to believe that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. It's a huge statement. And we know that the Mossad and the United States work very closely together. So,
and they shared information.
And they shared information, which meant that Bush may have been able to rely on this thing. I mean, these are big statements. Probably Republicans will buy 10,000 tapes of that, and show it in the election. But then we spoke to him about Iran, and there are rumors around that Israel may make a first strike at Iran because of their nuclear capacity. Your personal opinion on that? Do you sit on the Defense Committee, by the way? Oh, so
I sit on the same Defense and Foreign Affairs Committee, yeah. Well, with Iran it is much more complicated than it was with Iraq when we sent our jets to bomb the Iraq nuclear...
Begin, Menachem Begin.
Yeah, Menachem Begin. in 81.
By the way, you know, Shimon Peres was against that strike.
I know that Shimon Peres was against it, and Menachem Begin tend to be right. Just bear in mind what could be the situation 10 years from
historically,
now if we didn't do it. We saved this attack, I think, saved the Middle East for sure, and maybe the entire world from a chaos.
Absolutely.
So with Iran, the situation is much more complicated, because they studied the lessons and learned the lessons out of our attack over the Osirak nuclear plant, and they spread their entire nuclear plants. Part of them are digged very deep in the ground, and they are spread, and one attack over one target will not be enough. There should be something orchestrated, so that parallelly there will be attacks in dozens of sites, not only few sites. So it is going to be very difficult. But let me tell you something in general. Israel will not be able whatsoever to accept nuclear capability at the possession of Iran, because then it will be a threat to the very existence of the state of Israel. I hope that the Iranians will not be able to get to the point where they will have, or will be too close to having nuclear capability in their possession. And what the world should do, with the leadership of the United States and the assistance of Europe, Russia, and all the others, to press Iran via diplomatic ways and means, even to block Iran. You know, the way it was made during the Clinton administration.
Economically?
Containment. Yeah, to contain economically, to not allowing ships to enter into Iranian ports.
Blockade.
A blockade, yeah. And I think that it might help, and of course to put all the pressure needed in the UN, in the different international committees for nuclear energy, etc., etc. And if, God forbid, this is not going to work, then we will have, as I said, I don't want to be specific, but I think that the way I describe it is enough to give all the hints necessary. Israel will not be able to bear nuclear threat from Iran.
That's pretty clear. The International Court of Hague, and we know it really has no muscle. It's a UN organization. Are you worried about that? No, are you worried about the decision? Do you think there'll be some...
Yes, I'm worried, and I'm not worried as I'm concerned. Firstly, I think that we need very badly the security fence. It should go, generally speaking, alongside with the pre-67 border. It should contain also the big blocks of settlements which are adjacent to the Green Line, and all the other settlements, as long as they are there and we do not uproot them, they should get their own local suit of security, so to speak. And why I'm concerned? Because it has an effect. The decision that was made by the court in Hague has an effect, and the effect is not only psychological effect.
Economics?
It affects mainly on the decision makers all over the world, and we can, since the decision was made, we can find every now and then people which related to the decision and rely on the decision, right, and said that on the basis of this decision, it means that the offense is immoral, the offense is injustice, etc., etc. And I have to clarify that we need it very badly. And you know, just yesterday we witnessed an horrifying terror attack in Beersheba, right, where 16 people were murdered and close than 100 were injured. and the terrorists came from Hebron. Why from Hebron? Because there is no fence between Hebron and Beersheba. And we need the fence, because once we will have the fence, not only in the places that it exists, because it was erupted and now it covers 100 kilometers, something like that, we need additional 250 kilometers to 300 kilometers. When we will accomplish the fence, we will be able, in a much more effective way, to tackle terror.
Do you think Arafat is connected with all this terror?
Yeah, it might. We know that there is piece of information that Arafat is related to terror. I'm not sure if Arafat gives order, but you know, it is enough if Arafat hints, if he says, in an indirected understatement, in an understatement way, to do it, and we know that he encourages terror, no doubt.
Does Shimon Peres still believe in Arafat, Donnie?
Well, this is something that you have to ask Shimon Peres. I really don't know.
No,
I really don't know.
No, but when he
Let
talks,
me tell you my opinion.
Yeah.
Not about Shimon Peres, about Arafat. Arafat is no longer a partner.
No, you said that before.
Yeah, but there are others that might be partners on the Palestinian side. For instance, I think that Abu Mazen could be a partner. I think that Abu Allah is a partner. Both of them were partners in Oslo, so why shouldn't they be partners now? And Israel is the mighty power in the Middle East. We are the strongest power in the Middle East. We have to take the lead. We have to come with an initiative which will encourage the Palestinians to pave together with them, we and them, the way, so that we will be able to resume the talks.
No, the reason I asked you about Shimon Peres is only because does he talk about it in the party, not in context of what he believes?
No.
Would that be part of your party platform, that you should be able to talk to Arafat? I mean, you have a platform like the Americans do. You're going to have an economic platform.
Yes.
Do you believe in Bibi's privatization plans?
No, not at all. I think that Bibi's economic plan is a
lot of people are unhappy, very unhappy.
It's a plan which disturbs Israel. And as a matter of fact, you know, Israel is a unique state, not because we are smarter than anybody else, mainly because we are living under unique circumstances. You know that we have a compulsory service. Every youngster has to spend 3 years in the military, then up to the age of 50 to 55. We have to serve in the reserves. It is a hell of a burden, very difficult. And as a compensation, the government should assist the people. And what Bibi does, he separates the government from the people. What Bibi says, incorrectly, I think, is that everybody, like in the United States, should serve himself.
He's trying to Americanize.
Exactly.
It doesn't work.
It doesn't work in Israel. We should continue to have this social safety net so that people will not die in the streets, will not starve in the streets. And therefore, I totally disagree with Netanyahu, and I totally reject his economic plan.
By the way, were you part of this negotiating team with the Likud, or you were?
No, I was not part of the negotiating team, mainly because I rejected the
out of principle,
the unity. No, not on the principle, because of I thought that it was right for us to enter into discussions and negotiation. But I said also that we should not accept any conclusion at any price. And I think still that we have to support the disengagement plan, but we cannot support the economic program. And I thought that we should come with demands and accept changes, not only minor changes, but major changes in the economic program of Bibi. Once we did not get it, I said, stop the negotiation.
All right, we've got about 1 minute left. Abu Valan, who's a member of the Meretz Party, was a very good soldier. Sayeret Makalamo.
Very good soldier. He was under my command.
He gave a big interview 2 weeks ago. It said he expects there could be a civil war in Israel within 6 months. You buy that?
No, I don't think so. I don't think that there will be a civil war in Israel. I think that he was relating to the fact that maybe the government is going to decide upon uprooting some of the settlements, those in the Gaza Strip, and 4 settlements in the northern part of Samaria. I don't think that it will come to a civil right. To a civil war.
We're going to end on that note. A pleasure having you, Donnie. You got to come back.
Thank you very much. If you will invite me.
You're invited.
Thank you.
This is a phenomenal interview, and man is really part of the Israeli history militarily and now politically. We'll see you next week. We'll try to beat this show. It'll be hard unless we get an exclusive with Arafat. Then we would really ask him the questions. Maybe he'd resign after that. We'll